What if the reason you're exhausted isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're doing too little that matters? In the silent corridors of modern life, mediocrity is not an accident. It's a design. We are taught to strive, but only within limits. Be unique, they say, but not too different. Express yourself, but don't make others uncomfortable. Chase success, but only the kind that keeps the system intact. The result? A generation walking in circles inside gilded cages, mistaking motion for meaning. This is not freedom. This is sedation. Most people don't fear failure. They fear being seen. Truly seen. Because to be seen means to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable means to be judged outside the approved narrative. So we wear the costume of competence. We tick the boxes. We stay in line. And we wonder why we feel hollow. Nietzsche called it the morality of the herd, a system where obedience is praised and questioning is punished not with violence, but with silence, exclusion, invisibility. It's not that we're told what to think. It's that we're so busy conforming that we forget how to think at all. You scroll through images of curated lives. You sit in meetings about nothing. You laugh on cue. And somewhere, behind your eyes, something is dying. The part of you that once burned. The part of you that dreamed without permission. But comfort is addictive. The cage becomes familiar. And, eventually, familiarity becomes identity. You don't have to lock the door. People will stay in their prisons as long as you let them decorate the walls. So here's the real question. When did you stop choosing? There is a kind of suffering that doesn't scream. It scrolls. It attends meetings. It posts smiling pictures. It's not the pain that calls for help. It's the numbness that whispers, "This is fine." We live in an age of infinite access, yet feel increasingly unseen, surrounded by information, yet starved of meaning. We can Google the answer to any question, except the one that matters. Why do I feel so empty? Modern life has engineered a strange paradox. The more connected we become, the lonelier we feel. Mental health clinics are full. Sleep is broken. Attention spans collapse. Not from trauma, but from 1,000 shallow interactions that leave no trace in the soul. You're not broken. You're overstimulated and undernourished. The body is alive, but the spirit has checked out. Charles Taylor calls this the fragmented self, a being pulled in every direction, with no deep roots, no moral horizon. In a culture that sells performance as personality, people forget how to be alone, without being lonely. We're constantly watched, but rarely witnessed. So, we cope with sugar, with noise, with shallow validation. We mistake applause for affection, algorithms for intimacy. We chase relevance instead of reverence, and yet, beneath the surface, something resists. A hunger not for dopamine, but for depth, not for likes, but for light. What if your restlessness is sacred? What if your anxiety is the soul's protest against a life too small? This isn't depression. This is a quiet rebellion, and it's growing. When Nietzsche said, "God is dead," he wasn't celebrating. He was mourning. Not the death of religion, but the loss of grounding, of gravity, of something deeper than preference. He saw what was coming, a world where values are no longer discovered, but designed, manufactured, marketed. Without a center, we float. Without a compass, we wander. And into that abyss, Nietzsche screamed. His was not the cry of madness, but of unbearable clarity. He saw that modern man, stripped of tradition, no longer knew who he was, and so became whatever was most convenient. The last man, comfortable, entertained, agreeable, and utterly empty. Nietzsche despised mediocrity, not because it was weak, but because it was willing to trade greatness for safety, willing to abandon truth for acceptance, willing to become invisible, as long as it was liked. The real danger, he warned, isn't suffering, it's sedation, the narcotic of conformity, the slow death of the will. And yet, he didn't preach despair. He dared to imagine a different kind of human, the Übermensch, not a tyrant, but a creator, one who writes his own values, not by escaping struggle, but by going through it. Someone who says yes to life, not the edited version, but all of it, the pain, the absurdity, the loneliness, the fire. Nietzsche's scream was not against life. It was a call to wake up, to break the spell of the herd, to look the abyss in the eye and build from it a bridge. But here's the thing. Not everyone can hear that scream because it doesn't sound like rage. It sounds like responsibility. In a world of infinite choices, why does identity feel so fragile? Charles Taylor, one of Canada's most profound thinkers, called our age the age of authenticity, a time where being true to oneself became the highest moral ideal. But what does it mean to be true? When the self is fractured, you curate your life online. You perform pieces of yourself for different rooms. You belong everywhere and nowhere. This is the modern paradox. The more we chase uniqueness, the more we become copies. Taylor warns that without deep moral frameworks, what he calls strong evaluations, identity becomes performance, not rooted, not chosen, just convenient, just available. The self turns into a marketplace of moods and masks. What we call freedom becomes fragmentation. You're not choosing, you're reacting, not expressing, just echoing. And Canada, with all its diversity, mirrors this beautifully and painfully. A mosaic without mortar, where inclusion is policy, but not necessarily presence, where freedom of expression often hides a fear of confrontation, where we accept everything and so believe nothing with fire. Taylor doesn't condemn modern identity. He grieves it. He longs for depth in a culture of immediacy, for meaning that is not downloaded, but endured, for a self not assembled from hashtags, but discovered through difficulty. To be authentic, he says, is not to invent yourself. It's to uncover something already waiting, something only struggle can reveal. But in a world that fears silence, who dares to listen long enough to hear themselves? You don't need chains to keep people in line. All you need is consensus. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch conducted a simple experiment. He asked participants to match the length of a line. The answer was obvious. A child could see it. But when the group around them unanimously gave the wrong answer, something strange happened. Most people conformed, not because they believed the lie, but because standing alone felt worse than being wrong. This is the herd instinct, not the fear of being punished, but the fear of being excluded. It's the silent contract we all sign. I will betray what I see if it lets me belong. Nietzsche saw this long before psychology gave it a name. He called it slave morality, a value system built not on strength, but on submission, where virtue is not action, but obedience, where the good is whatever keeps the peace, even if it kills the truth. We see it in the workplace, in classrooms, in families, in silence during injustice, in applause we don't feel, in laughter at jokes that aren't funny. This isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. We conform, not just in action, but in desire. We start wanting what others want, fearing what they fear, loving what is safe. And so mediocrity spreads, not as a flaw, but as a virtue, a quiet epidemic of compromise. We stop dreaming not because we're tired, but because we're surrounded by those who've already given up. But here's the truth. The herd will never reward your difference. They will fear it, resist it, mock it, until they need it. Because only those who break from the pattern can ever create a new one. There are deaths that happen quietly, not with violence, but with forgetting. George Grant, philosopher of a vanishing Canada, saw something most of us missed. He didn't speak of war or revolution, but of something more tragic, the slow erosion of a nation's soul. In his eyes, Canada was never just geography. It was a moral project, a space carved between empire and resistance, tradition and tolerance. But he watched that space collapse, not from outside invasion, but from technological assimilation. Grant saw technology, not as tools, but as ideology, not what we use, but what we become. He feared that as Canada embraced the logic of progress, efficiency, and productivity, it lost its contemplative spirit and surrendered its distinct moral voice. He called it the end of Canadian nationality, not with flags burning, but with silence, with universities turning into factories, with public life reduced to marketing, with spirituality displaced by spectacle. For Grant, the danger wasn't American culture, it was Canadian forgetfulness, the passive acceptance of imported desires, the quiet death of reverence, ritual, and reflection. He mourned a people no longer capable of asking, what is good? What is sacred? What is worth preserving? Today, we build fast. We adapt quickly, but we rarely pause to ask, adapt to what? And at what cost? Nietzsche screamed against the death of God. Grant wept for the death of memory. Together they warn us when we trade depth for speed, silence for noise, soul for data. We don't just lose our past, we lose our future. Great empires don't fall in a single night. They crumble in comfort, not with fire, but with fatigue. The Roman Empire, vast and invincible, didn't die from enemy swords. It died from within, from decadence, division, and distraction, from a population that forgot the cost of greatness. Citizens once trained for war and philosophy. They built monuments not just of stone, but of meaning. But over time, bread replaced battle, spectacle replaced thought, and the desire for ease replaced the will to endure. Sound familiar? Today we don't gather in colosseums, we scroll through reels, we don't worship emperors, we follow influencers. But the instinct is the same. Entertain me, distract me, spare me from myself. The Roman collapse was not just political, it was spiritual. The people stopped believing in anything greater than their own survival, and once that happens, it's only a matter of time. Nietzsche saw this cycle. He knew that when a culture loses its sense of tragedy, it also loses its capacity for transcendence. When we treat suffering as a glitch instead of a teacher, we become fragile, soft, apathetic, and mediocrity becomes not the exception, but the norm. We tell ourselves we are advanced, progressive, but if we're so evolved, why do we fear silence? Why do we flee stillness? Why are we so desperately entertained? Rome fell not because it was poor, but because it was bored, because it had everything except purpose. And now, as we scroll past the ruins of meaning, we must ask, are we any different, or are we just waiting for our fall to be streamed live? There comes a moment when endurance is no longer enough, when survival is not the goal, but the insult. Nietzsche called us to more than comfort. He dared to imagine a human being who doesn't run from pain, but is forged by it, who doesn't wait for meaning to arrive, but carves it from the abyss. He named this being the Übermensch, not a superhero, but a soul awake, not someone who escapes the herd, but someone who no longer needs it. But Nietzsche's vision was dangerous. Without roots, transcendence becomes theatre. Without community, freedom becomes isolation. And this is where Charles Taylor returns, not as contradiction, but as complement. Taylor reminds us, authenticity is not about invention, it's about discovery. We are not blank slates, we are stories in search of authorship. To become ourselves, we must be in conversation with something older, deeper, sacred. Between Nietzsche's fire and Taylor's depth, a path emerges. Not blind rebellion, but honest becoming. Not self-worship, but self-integration. This is individuation, not the ego's triumph, but the soul's unveiling. To say yes to life, as Nietzsche insisted, but to a life that includes grief, doubt, responsibility, and grace. The will to rise is not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It begins in the quiet act of refusal. Refusing to numb, refusing to shrink, refusing to let your spirit be outsourced to algorithms and trends. You do not have to become exceptional. You only have to become real. And realness, in this world, is rebellion. So stand, not because it's easy, but because it's the only thing left that matters. True rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, it refuses, it walks away. It creates in silence what others destroy with noise. History is full of those who refuse to conform, not to be special, but to be whole. Nelson Mandela chose 27 years in a cell over the comfort of surrender. His dignity was not in the speeches, but in the silence, in the patience. He didn't just break a system. He broke the illusion that freedom could be taken from within. Simone Weil, fragile in body, unyielding in spirit, abandoned academic prestige to stand among workers and soldiers. She said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." And she lived that, not as a concept, but as blood. Vincent van Gogh, ignored in life, tormented in soul, painted what he saw when no one else looked. His colors were not realism. They were rebellion, proof that to see beauty while drowning is not madness, it's courage. These were not heroes by design. They were human beings who could not pretend. They didn't transcend pain. They honored it. They didn't flee society. They exposed its lies by living truthfully, painfully, imperfectly. And today, we scroll past their kind. We idolize charisma. We consume authenticity as content. But few dare to embody it, because rebellion, real rebellion, is costly. It demands not outrage, but integrity. Not spectacle, but sacrifice. But if mediocrity is the cage, then rebellion is the breath. So the question isn't, can you rise? The question is, what are you still willing to kneel for? You've made it this far, through the silence, through the shadows, through the scream. And now, you stand at the threshold of an ancient decision. Not the kind you shout, not the kind you post, but the kind you live. Quietly, consistently, in the dark. Mediocrity will welcome you back with open arms. It always does. It speaks in soft tones. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Don't think too much. Just be like them. And for a moment, it feels safe. It feels easier. But deep down, you know, there's a cost. The erosion of wonder. The betrayal of fire. The slow burial of your own voice. Nietzsche didn't demand that you become great. He asked whether you had the strength to refuse being small. Charles Taylor didn't offer clarity. He invited you to the struggle for depth. George Grant didn't fight for politics. He mourned the soul of a people too polite to remember themselves. And now, in your hands, the question returns. Will you choose comfort or courage? Not once, but every morning, every silence, every time you say no when it would be easier to say nothing. This isn't motivation. This is memory. The memory of what it feels like to be awake. If this touched something within you, maybe it's time to meet yourself with more gentleness, more honesty, more rebellion. Subscribe, not for more noise, but for the space to think again.